Alright friends, hope you're doing well. Mr. Doak here. We are going to take a look at medical paternalism tonight. And we're all transitioning into this online what have you. And so I'm going to try to move fast. I'm going to try to cover what we need to cover and not be long-winded. Feel free to put it on time and a quarter if you want to spin through. But just to recap, normally I would have us sit and discuss why does Kant believe duty is the motive that should motivate our decisions, and I would remind you of the reasons why he disliked utilitarianism and reducing us just to creatures of pain and pleasure, and why he wanted to maintain our dignity and our free will. What am I doing here? That's not exactly what I want to do. Trying to make it so I'm not entirely opaque. That's whatever. I'm fine like that. And then I just want to, this would have been one of our discussion questions. Stealing, lying, and killing are generally considered bad acts. You guys know some of the other bad acts that I generally consider on my, my list of never okay, not anywhere, not know how. Not any day of the week, not on a plane, not on an island, not even on a boat. What makes them bad? Is it the consequences? Are you a utilitarian or an egoist who judges things by the outcome to the individual or the people affected? The degree of pain or unmet needs. We're going to look at unmet needs soon. We haven't really I haven't talked too much about needs and feelings with us yet. What motivations are there behind the action? As Kant points out, the motive behind an action does influence the moral nature of it. It's not everything. Or is it the nature of the action itself? Another aspect of Kant's deontology that some actions just self-destruct if you try to universalize them. Or is it the virtues and qualities expressed by the individuals? Now, there's a whole ethical theory called virtue ethics, which is very complicated and very elegant. And worth sinking your teeth into. But over the years, I've just trimmed it out of the program because it's just harder to make it directly relevant to you guys. So, last time in class, we looked at the Hippocratic Oath. We looked at the Old and the New, and how it kind of moved away from a more materialistic patient-centered materialism, right, that viewed the patient as a car and the physician was the mechanic who came in, fixed the pieces, didn't really need feedback, didn't need to know the opinion of this peasant who came in to be treated. The peasant was lucky to have the attention of the physician, right? And how in the 20th century there was this big swing away from paternalism, which essentially general paternalism says policy or practice on the part of people in positions of authority of restricting the freedom and responsibilities of the subordinate to them and subordinate supposed best interests. And medical paternalism is specifically withholding of patient information or freedoms by medical personnel for the benefit of the patient. Right? So you don't want to tell the patient that they have cancer if it's going to exacerbate their blood pressure and make them have other, if telling a patient the truth about their condition directly causes them harm, medical paternalism and what they like to call therapeutic privilege, which is their fancy way of saying we're going to lie to them for their supposed best interest, is justified if you think telling them something is going to directly harm them. Patient autonomy, the right of patients to make decisions about their medical care without being influenced by medical personnel. This should be somewhat familiar. So, I wanted to briefly look at, not the case study, which is good, but the article in our textbook on page 60, Refutation of Medical Paternalism. And basically, he makes straight, he pretty well articulates the reasons for why we value self-determination. Right? He says, first is the presumption of their being the best interests of their own, or the best judges of their own interests, which may depend upon personal value orderings known only to them. There's often a temptation for others to impose their own values and preferences, but this would less likely to produce satisfaction for the individuals concerned. It's like the woman who was going to have an aneurysm unless she has surgery, but she didn't want the scar. Many people would think like that's a dumb value judgment to prefer potentially dying over having a scar, but that's her value judgment, right? If she's in her right mind, she should be able to make it. Some people think that they should cover themselves and their face in crazy tattoos. That's not my value judgment, right? But they get to make theirs, I get to make mine. The second reason is the independent value of self-determination, at least in regard to important decisions. In medical contexts, decisions may involve life and death alternatives, affect the completion of major life projects, or affect bodily integrity. Persons desire the right or freedom to make their own choices, and satisfaction of this desire is important in itself. So it's pretty straightforward. Lastly, society flourishes when people pursue their own things. Specific to medicine, I think I nailed them all in there. The right to be told the truth about one's condition, the right to accept or refuse or withdraw from treatment on the basis of adequate information regarding alternatives, risks, or uncertainties. If doctors are permitted or required by the principle of providing optimal care, cure, or health maintenance for patients, sometimes to withhold truth or decide on their own what therapeutic measures to employ, then the Hippocratic principle overrides important rights to self-determination that would otherwise obtain. So, long-winded way of saying, without letting people make their own choices with the information, it amounts to force, right? This is just I won't use the gun analogy, but I think you get the point. And so he says, all right, what do we do? Generally, I think we all agree, people have the right to make bad choices that only affect them. If you want to wake up and smoke cigarettes and drink diet soda and make bacon for breakfast, that's your right. If you're of legal age and sound mind. But when should this be restricted? And what's the strong case? Like children should be forced to go to bed at a certain bedtime, right? When should adults be forced to do something? And he looks at the case. This is Paradigm Cases, bottom of 61, top of 62. He says, the easiest cases to justify are those in which a person is acting against even his immediate desires, out of ignorance. So he says, take Dick, who desires to take a train to New York, but is about to board the train for Boston on the other side of the track. And without time to warn him, he can only be grabbed and shoved in the opposite direction. Coursing him in this way is paternalistic, since it overrides his right of free movement for his own good. His own good is uncontroversial in interpretation in this easiest case. It is defined by his own stated immediate and long-range preferences. The two are not always in conflict. So what's he saying? He's saying normally if you grab someone and shove them or pull them somewhere, that's violating their freedom, right? Their rights, their ability to act. But if you're doing it because they're about to step into the wrong train, right? Then you know they're trying to go the other way, so you're helping them do what they want to do. If you're about to step into traffic, right, and someone grabs you out of the road and yanks you violently, that's paternalistic. But in those cases, we think that's justified, right? Because the person was acting against their own immediate and probably long-term goals and values, unless they were just trying to end it, right? So it gets trickier when the danger is long-term, right? So here, in the immediate, the clear-cut example, paternalism is justified, and most of us think it's justified when the person's about to act contrary to their own goals and values. Yeah? It gets trickier when it's a delay. So, Jane does not desire to be seriously injured or to increase greatly her chance of serious injury for trivial reasons. Yet, out of carelessness or just because she considers it a nuisance and fails to apply statistical probabilities to her own case, she does not wear a helmet when riding a motorcycle. So, person not wearing a motorcycle helmet, riding a motorcycle, kind of dangerous. Excuse me. Here, it might be claimed that while her action is voluntary in relation to trivial short-term desires, it is nevertheless not fully voluntary in a deeper sense. But to make this claim, we must be certain of the person's long-range preferences, of the fact that her action is inconsistent with those preferences, or else uncontroversially inconsistent with the preferences of any rational person. So what are they saying there? They're saying she's not wearing a helmet. She knows statistically it's not good for her, right? You need to wear a helmet. So she wants to live a long, healthy life and be safe, right? Her short-term decision to not wear a helmet, she thinks she's doing that freely and voluntarily and autonomously, right? But truly, she's acting contrary to her own long-term preferences. It's as if she's walking into the oncoming traffic or onto the opposite train, right? It's just the fact that it's statistical, it's downrange, yeah? So is she acting freely when she does this thing, which is contrary to her own goals and values? So, take a minute, think about other things people do that are contrary to their own long-term goals and values. Let's say you have a family, you have kids, you want to live a long, healthy life, but you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, eat a pound of bacon every other day, and you don't exercise, and you're sedentary and watch, 9 hours of TV a day, right? Are you acting freely when you do all those things? If your own long-term goals and values say, I want to live a long, healthy life, see my kids graduate high school, yada, 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 or what's going on there? So, I will put a post about that, and we will move on to the next video. But, I'd urge you to think about, we're going to get into all of the stuff. Okay, that'll be in the next one. We're going to keep these short. Actually, just going to finish the same video off. So, Jane riding the motorcycle, no helmet, right? Is she acting freely if she doesn't have a death wish, right? Well, they say no. The chances are far greater that a rider will at some time fall or be knocked off the cycle and be thankful for having a helmet than that one will prefer serious head injury to the inconvenience of wearing protection that can prevent such injury, right? Therefore, we may justifiably assume that a person not wearing a helmet is not acting in light of her own true long-range values and preferences. So they would consider that a justified act of paternalism, right? When a person's directly acting against their own long-term goals and values, right? To know what motorcycle accident stats are for wearing helmets and not, and still think that you can wear one without one and not have, be included in that stat is foolish, right? So that's the argument. That's a strong argument for paternalism. Now, strong arguments for paternalism in the medical field, state control over physician licensing and the requirement that prescriptions be obtained for many kinds of drugs are medical cases in point. Licensing physicians prevents some quacks from harming other people, but also limits these people's freedom of choice for their own good, right? Like, not anyone can sell medicine, right, and call it medicine. Not anyone can practice medicine, right? Not anyone can practice. These are forms of paternalism that we think generally are justified, right? Now, you'd have greater availability to seek treatment if you were sick, but how do you know it's not a salesman or a quack or a trickster? So that is the argument there, and essentially, this is Goldman, right? Yeah, Alan Goldman. Goldman says, even still, the argument reduces to these 5 points on 65. He says, all right, if you distill the argument from medical paternalism down, it boils down to these 5 points. A, we believe disclosure of information to the patient will sometimes increase the likelihood of depression, physical deterioration, or result in medically inoptimal treatment, right? Just like the case study of the old woman with hypertension. She's going in for routine surgery. If we really tell her there's a chance of dying, it might make the surgery not happen as well because it's going to jack all her levels and it's going to exacerbate her, treatmental harm. Therefore, disclosure of information is therefore sometimes likely to be detrimental to the patient's health, perhaps even to hasten his or her death. 3. Health and prolonged life can be assumed to have priority among preferences for patients who place themselves under physicians'